Hello, everyone. Hi, this is Rosalind Sedacca, and I'm the founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network. And you're listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And this show is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedacca. And I'm so glad you're joining us today. As you know, October is a very important month. It's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it's something that too often is put behind the scenes and not talked about. Even in today's day and age, we're very reticent to discuss all aspects of domestic violence and the consequences of domestic violence on everyone in the family, adults, children, entire families, and the people involved, of course, as well. So we want to address this, and I have an expert on domestic violence who's my guest today. She's also a colleague of mine. Her name is Amy Sherman, and I want to welcome you, Amy, to the show.
Thank you. How are you, Roz?
I'm just doing great, and I'm very excited to talk about this. Amy, I know that you have a history that goes back a long way in working with women, especially, who are victims of domestic violence. But as we all know, domestic violence is not just about women as victims. Men can be victims too. Children can be victims. What we want to do is see if we could untangle some of this and make some sense of how this happens, why it happens, and what we can do about it today, because it's something that's been going on for decades, for centuries, and it has to stop. Yes. So first, why don't you give us some idea of your background and how you came into this universe?
Well, thank you, Roz. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have my license in Florida. And for many years, I did run a domestic abuse program for women and actually men. And what I did in that program was, aside from doing support groups, was I was dispelling the myth that it doesn't happen in the Jewish community. And what Roz had said is that it's prevalent throughout the world, really, and it happens to anybody and anyone. So it cuts across all socioeconomic boundaries, all genders, all religions, every background, whatever your race is, ethnicity, it doesn't matter, because it happens in all different cultures and sometimes in more cultures than others. So over the years, I did work with many men and women. It happens 1 in 3 women actually will experience domestic violence or at least abuse. 1 in 4 men, and it didn't used to be that high. It used to be 1 in 7. Now it's 1 in 4. So it is, unfortunately, it's pretty prevalent.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this forever and ever, as long as you and I have both been in the mental health awareness profession. It's been a topic that we address, and we address it every year. And yet, for some reason, nothing is stopping this. Is the cases improving, that there are fewer cases, or is it growing? And what is going on now that is keeping us from being able to stop the movement of people feeling that they have the right to violently attack other people in their lives?
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for that one. What makes people act the way they do? I wish I knew. I'd write a book on that. Mm-hmm. People will take advantage of other people. And unfortunately, if you allow it, and, you know, in the groups that I did run, many women, and I had women with all different ages, but some of them were 70, 80 years old, married for 50 years. And they said, why did I allow it to happen for so long? And that's the big question. Why do we allow it? So a person will coerce another person, intimidate another person, threaten another person because they can. So why is it happening, and how can we prevent it from happening? And why is it, happening even more so, or is it happening less? I don't know. But if you allow it, if you don't feel confident enough and empowered enough to be able to say, no, this is not what it's not acceptable and I will not allow it, then it's going to continue, unfortunately.
Yeah, very much so. So there are things that are happening this year where we're trying to bring more information to the forefront. What is it that you think the average person doesn't know? Are there any things that are confusing people or misunderstood about this, even though it's been spoken about so often?
I think that people know what domestic violence is, what domestic abuse is. I like to use the term domestic abuse more than violence, because you could be in an abusive relationship, which is really violent to your psyche, and
Mhm.
not be physically abused.
Yes.
So, and it includes so many different things. It includes, being threatened by somebody. It includes financial scarcity. I have a couple, or had a couple, who the woman was given $200 a week for groceries and incidentals, and she had to and she worked, but she gave her husband all the money,
Hmm.
her paycheck, and she always got $200. So she was, which is not horrible, but it's, if she needed any more money, she had to ask for it. Who does that as an adult? Why
Yeah.
does that happen? Why are we misunderstanding that this is not acceptable in a relationship?
She was
I
on a
tell
leash.
Excuse me?
She was on a leash.
Well, and that's what happens. And we can't blame the woman, because some men, for instance, who are, if they are the abusers, are very powerful. They're strong. They speak louder. They're more intimidating. They're larger than women.
Domineering.
And yeah, domineering, exactly. So, a woman submits because we do that. We want to, keep the peace, and we want everything okay. But by doing that, we allow it. And I feel so terrible when a woman says, why did I let it happen so long? I just had recently a woman tell me that. Why was I in this relationship for so long? And the answer to that is, it's huge. There's no real answer. It's just that we're afraid to leave. We don't feel confident and secure enough to leave.
And I think you're really right that fear is a huge piece of the puzzle. Fear will keep people stuck in many facets of their lives. As you know, my universe specializes in divorce, and of course, divorce is too closely connected to domestic abuse, because in many divorces, it may take someone months, years, or decades before they finally have the courage to make that decision. But it can very often come after feeling that they've been in an abusive relationship, a toxic relationship, one that hasn't been healthy, hasn't been supportive for them, and finally they get the courage to say, I want to leave. But it isn't that simple, is it?
No, women will leave a relationship 7 times before they actually leave permanently.
Wow.
And why do they come back? Well, again, those insecurities. Can I make it on my own? I'm a single. If they have children, I'm a single parent. There's all those factors come in, and so when they do come back, then there's a honeymoon period. Things are okay. And then, of course, it cycles. Abuse does cycle. And you go through that honeymoon phase, and then you go through the intimidation phase, and then you go through the violent or emotional abuse phase, or whatever it is. And then it starts all over again, around and around and around. Unfortunately, most times it increases in frequency and increases in intensity. So by the time you do leave after 7 times, perhaps, you're done. You really do want to leave. But what happens then? Are you safe?
Yeah.
I used to work with these women. I used to do a safety plan with them, because here their partner is angry. They generally, and this is of course general, the men, if they're the abusers, they love their wives. They don't want them to leave, but they like the control, the power and control, because that's what it's all about. So they don't want their partner to leave. And when the woman finally gets empowered enough and realizes, I cannot stay, they leave. And then the man is really mad. So does he own a weapon? Is she in danger? And that's always a scary thing. So if a woman finally does get a divorce, is she safe? Some women tell me they get stalked by their husbands, their partners. You don't even have to be married to experience domestic abuse. There's plenty of boyfriends, girlfriends, who are doing this, and you hear about it in the news all the time. Unfortunately, we see estranged husbands murdered their wives, and of course, I do want to include in this not only, divorce and couples who are married, but there's also elder abuse and child abuse as well. And, I want to just throw that into the mix.
Yes,
can't leave that out.
Important to be aware of. And I know that fear and insecurity play a huge part in paralyzing us from making movements. So it seems like having a support system is one of the strongest things that you can have as a resource to fall back on when you're making this monumental decision to finally break away from an abuser. And can you talk a little bit about what is entailed in having a support system?
Yeah, you should definitely, you know, and this is the thing with working in the Jewish community. There's a silence because it doesn't happen in the Jewish community. I mean, Jewish men are the best husbands. So one of the things that I had to do with dispelling the myth about abuse in that culture is that it does happen. So breaking the silence, that's the big thing. If you want to break away, you have to tell somebody what's going on. So gathering up your support system, whether it's your family, you know, your relatives, close friends, or just a support system out there that is there for you, you know, with a community. Very important not to keep it silent. What we used to do is put these little cards in the bathroom of the women's bathroom talking about resources. Do this, call here, you know, here are the, because women are afraid to speak up. And that's, just to clarify for a minute, why are women afraid to speak up? They have a lot invested. You have a beautiful home. You don't want to leave your home. You have children who, you know, they don't want to be coming from a divorced family. And you know, so children will say, Mommy and Daddy, I want you to stay together. You know, you have financial security. Do you want to leave that? So what, you know, sometimes women have to weigh the pros and the cons about leaving. But if you have a support system, if you have people who will say, I will be there and help you out, it makes the transition a lot easier.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is this is never black and white. The subtleties, the gray areas are huge, and that's part of what keeps people paralyzed with fear or not able to make a decision and sort of hanging out and waiting for a long time. We're going to go further into this right after our break. This is Rosalind Sedacca with Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. Okay, we're back. You're listening to Rosalind Sedacca on the Going Solo Network, WGSN-DB, and we are talking to Amy Sherman, who's a licensed mental health counselor, who's done a lot of work with people, women and men, who are victims of domestic abuse in various ways and levels. And everyone's situation is a little different, but we want to bring more awareness to how this happens and how so many people get caught up and stuck with the inability to free themselves when they're feeling uncomfortable, unhappy, in a toxic relationship, and that sometimes even gets violent. So Amy, what do you suggest that people do when it all starts with awareness? You have to first become aware and realize that this is something that you've been allowing and accepting into your life, and what are the next steps for people?
That's a good question, Roz. So many of my clients, when we talk about this, they would say, I had no idea that this was happening to me. Wow. So yes, awareness is really important. So what we need to understand is, and I give a lot of information. I hand out sheets on abuse, talking about, does this look familiar? You know, are there, do you have financial, insecurity because you're asking for money? Or do you feel that your money is not equal? You know, do you feel like an equal partner in your relationship? You know, these are questions that people don't even think about. They just assume my husband takes care of this, you know, he takes care of the finances. How many women do not even have their name on, their bank accounts? Yeah. How many women do not, have their name on their homes? And they don't realize that. So it's very, very important to educate yourself and make sure that you are in your relationship an equal partner, because you don't want to be surprised later on when all of a sudden all the money is gone and you're sitting there.
You're not kidding.
So awareness is extremely important. And when you realize that, oh my goodness, I may be in an abusive relationship, whether it's a physical, you'll know obviously if it's physically abusive. But sometimes people don't realize that emotional abuse is even worse than that, because look, the physical, I mean, the scratches and the red marks, they do go away, but that emotional abuse, what happens with women and men is that, you start off as a whole person, and I kind of equate it to like an iceberg. And what happens over years of abuse, emotional abuse, being told that you are less than, belittled, diminished, discounted, you're chipped away, and your whole personality, and you wind up being a little ice cube. So these women, and that's why it's so hard for them to leave, because they don't feel like they're capable of doing it. They've been told, for years and years and years of abuse, that they're nothing and nobody. And also, this is the big buzzword, gaslighting. The abusive people tend to gaslight. They tell you, you're the crazy one. You don't know what you're talking about. No, I never said that, making you feel crazy. So it really, it compounds, it compounds, it compounds. So yeah, can you leave the relationship easily? No, not really. You really have to get yourself the support system that we talked about. Get yourself, the things that you need so that you could leave. When I talk to a woman about the safety plan, I always say, have clothes, have your, birth certificate, insurance papers, all kinds of important papers, copies at least, in an area with clothes and extra money. Give it to somebody. Put it in the back of your car if you have your own car that's safely away. So that if you needed to leave, in 2 minutes, you needed to run out the door, have the keys by the door and you're out the door.
Be prepared.
Absolutely. You have to be prepared. And that's the worst case scenario, where you really have to run because your life is in danger.
And so, as founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, you know that my top priority is always, what is the impact on the children? Because children are always innocent in all of these adult challenges. Can you talk a little bit about how kids are affected by being in a home where they're experiencing this, where it isn't bad enough, where it ends and it just continues and the kids are living with that? What happens?
I had a client just this morning, actually.
Wow.
She's not divorced, but she and her partner are separated. They're not living together. And the 5-year-old little girl, when she comes back from seeing daddy all week, she says to mommy, how come you're so mean to daddy? How come you're the pirate and always are? She said, use the word pirate. This is a 5-year-old. Wow. Which means that dad is saying bad things about mom to the little girl. So what happens to the kids? They're caught in the middle of this. And unless the parents are educated enough to be aware to not do that to a child, it could be very impactful and detrimental to the child's welfare. Of course, they're going to wind up being angry kids. Mom and dad are angry with each other, talking on the phone. What do you learn? We learn through observation, don't we? You see mom and dad arguing. Well, this is what you do in school when a kid you're not getting your way. You argue. And if it's violent and the child sees dad, or even mom throwing something at, then they're going to do that too. Is it any wonder that your child is having trouble in school? Yeah. You have a child who's starting in with being a bully with other kids because they see it. So it absolutely does impact the child. So we have to be, as parents, we have to be models of good behavior and, and deal with our issues in a way that children do not can't relate to, they want to relate to the good behavior, but certainly not the bad behavior. Don't be shocked if your child is angry, if you are an angry parent talking to your partner.
And most professionals in any facet of the mental health community will find that there is a disconnect between the parents' experience and the kids' experience, and they're not always aware and mindful about what it's like to be a child in those situations. I always talk to my clients about stepping into your children's shoes and try to experience the world at their age in their shoes, because it can make you a little more compassionate and empathic, especially the abuser, if they stop and think about what the experience is like for these kids. It's so difficult. They're powerless to do anything. And kids who are very bright, sometimes they will even side with the abuser because the abuser has more power in the relationship and the kids want to take advantage of that power. Or they play mind games with the parents because they want to be able to align themselves with whoever is giving them a better deal, more freedom, less discipline, whatever it is. Have you had that experience?
Yes, as a matter of fact, and I want to add to that, that's all absolutely true. But children will also align themselves with a more powerful parent because it's safer.
Yes.
If they're with dad who is beating mom, they may not be beaten because they're agreeing with dad and all, so they do feel safer, which is so sad and so, unfortunate for the children, because then mom doesn't have the support of her own child, so it does make things very difficult as a child. You're going to grow up to be so confused, and and we don't want to teach young girls that moms can be weak and subservient and disempowered in a relationship. So that's why the women, when they finally do get into a support group and they learn a little more about abuse, they learn how to empower themselves, they learn how to speak to their partner in a different way. You can't argue with somebody who's not arguing back. Mm-hmm. And what happens is they being the abuser's behavior changes when somebody is changing themselves. And they have to find a new tactic, which they do, unfortunately. But you change the momentum of the relationship to be a different kind of relationship, and showing your daughter, or your children, that it's possible, to empower yourself and make things better for you.
So it's very important for parents to be mindful about watching their children, to be aware that you are the role models for your children, and that they are learning from you, and that you let your children know that they don't have to accept abuse in their own lives, and if they're seeing the abuse, that they don't have to accept that is the way a relationship should be. And you can talk to your children, but you don't ever want to have your children become your little therapist, because you don't want your children ever parenting you. That robs them immediately of their childhood and puts them in an adult position, which is very damaging for a children's psyche. There is so much that can be said on this topic, and I know we've just touched the surface, but in the short time we have left, Amy, what words do you want to leave us with as a takeaway message?
I just want to remind women and men that there is no guilt or shame in seeking help, because we do sometimes feel like, I'm the only one in the world who's experiencing this. I did it to myself. I stayed too long, blah, blah, blah. There is no guilt, and there's certainly no shame in seeking help to get yourself out of the situation, because the alternative is just more of the same. And if you want that, then okay. But if you don't want that and you're ready to make a move, then pick yourself up, brush yourself off, seek help. There is a lot of help out there, because this is not something that's, that nobody knows about. It's out there. Resources are out there. So I do encourage everybody to get either a therapist, a support group, or just talk to a friend, so that it's not your secret. Because when it becomes only your secret, you feel that there's nothing you could do, and that's not true. So I really encourage everybody to get out there and look for what is out there for you.
That is so brilliant, so excellent, important that you said that. Reach out to a therapist, to a coach, to a support group, to anyone who's a professional who works in this universe of abuse, and make sure that you are not alone in handling this. It'll make a big difference for you. So thank you so much, Amy Sherman. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And again, I hope you will join us at WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, for Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedacca. And as you know, you could find information about child-centered divorce and all the wonderful resources we have available, including a free ebook, at my website, childcentereddivorce.com. We'll see you next time. Thank you.